Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the centre cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. W.B. Yeats, The Second Coming. Things Fall Apart. Chinua Achebe. Chapters 1-3. Summary. Chapter 1. Among the Igbo. Proverbs are the palm oil with which words are eaten. Okonkwo is a wealthy and respected warrior of the Umuofia clan, a lower Nigerian tribe that is part of a consortium of 9 connected villages, including Okonkwo's village, Igado. In his youth, he brought honor to his village by beating Amelins the cat in a wrestling contest. Until his match with Okonkwo, the cat had been undefeated for 7 years. Okonkwo is completely unlike his now deceased father, Anoka, who feared the sight of blood and was always borrowing and losing money, which meant that his wife and children often went hungry. Anoka was, however, a skilled flute player and had a gift for and love of language. Summary. Chapter 2. One night, the town crier rings the ogene, or gong, and requests that all of the clansmen gather in the market in the morning. At the gathering, Ogbwe, a noted orator, announces that someone from the village of Mabeno murdered the wife of a Umuofia tribesman while she was in their market. The crowd expresses anger and indignation, and Okonkwo travels to Mabeno to deliver the message that they must hand over to Umuofia a virgin and a young man. Should Mabeno refuse to do so, the 2 villages must go to war, and Umuofia has a fierce reputation for its skill in war and magic. Okonkwo is chosen to represent his clan because he is its fiercest warrior. Earlier in the chapter, as he remembers his past victories, we learn about the 5 human heads that he has taken in battle. On important occasions, he drinks palm wine from the first head that he captured. Not surprisingly, Mabeno agrees to Umuofia's terms. The elders give the virgin to Ogbwe as his wife, but are not sure what to do with the 15-year-old boy, Ikemefuna. The elders decide to turn him over to Okonkwo for safekeeping and instruction. Okonkwo, in turn, instructs his first wife to care for Ikemefuna. In addition to being a skilled warrior, Okonkwo is quite wealthy. He supports 3 wives and 8 children, and each wife has her own hut. Okonkwo also has a barn full of yams, a shrine for his ancestors, and his own hut, called an obi. Okonkwo fears weakness, a trait that he associates with his father and with women. When Okonkwo was a child, another boy called Anoka Agbala, which is used to refer to women as well as to men who have not taken a title. Because he dreads weakness, Okonkwo is extremely demanding of his family. He finds his 12-year-old son, Moi, to be lazy, so he beats and nags the boy constantly. Summary. Chapter 3. Okonkwo built his fortune alone as a sharecropper because Anoka was never able to have a successful harvest. When he visited the oracle, Anoka was told that he failed because of his laziness. Ill-fated, Anoka died of a shameful illness, swelling which was an abomination to the earth goddess. Those suffering from swelling stomachs and limbs are left in the evil forest to die, so that they do not offend the earth by being buried. Anoka never held any of the communities for prestigious titles because they must be paid for, and he left numerous debts unpaid. As a result, Okonkwo cannot count on Anoka's help in building his own wealth and in constructing his obi. What's more, he has to work hard to make up for his father's negative strikes against him. Okonkwo succeeds in exceeding all the other clansmen as a warrior, a farmer, and a family provider. He begins by asking a wealthy clansman, Nwakabi, to give him 400 seed yams to start a farm. Because Nwakabi admired Okonkwo's hard-working nature, he gave him 800. One of Anoka's friends gave him another 400, but because of horrible droughts and relentless downpours, Okonkwo could keep only 1/3 of the harvest. Some farmers who were lazier than Okonkwo put off planting their yams and thus avoided the grave losses suffered by Okonkwo and the other industrious farmers. That year's devastating harvest left a profound mark on Okonkwo, and for the rest of his life, he considers his survival during that difficult period proof of his fortitude and inner mettle. Although his father tried to offer some words of comfort, Okonkwo felt only disgust for someone who would turn to words at a time when either action or silence was called for. Analysis. Chapters 1 to 3 we are introduced immediately to the complex laws and customs of Okonkwo's clan and its commitment to harmonious relations. For example, the practice of sharing palm wine and kola nuts is repeated throughout the book to emphasize the peacefulness of the Igbo. When Anoka's resentful neighbor visits him to collect a debt, the neighbor does not immediately address the debt. Instead, he and Anoka share a kola nut and pray to their ancestral spirits. Afterward, they converse about community affairs at great length, the customs regulating social relations emphasize their common interests and culture, diffusing possible tension. The neighbor further eases the situation by introducing the subject of debt through a series of Igbo proverbs, thus making use of a shared oral tradition, as Okonkwo does when he asks Achebe for some seed yams. Through his emphasis on the harmony and complexity of the Igbo, Achebe contradicts the stereotypical European representations of Africans as savages. Another important way in which Achebe challenges such stereotypical representations is through his use of language. As Achebe writes in his essay on Joseph Conrad's novella Heart of Darkness, colonialist Europe tended to perceive Africa as a foil or negation of Western culture and values, imagining Africa to be a primordial land of silence. But the people of Umuofia speak a complex language full of proverbs and literary and rhetorical devices. Achebe's translation of the Igbo language into English retains the cadences, rhythms, and speech patterns of the language without making them sound, as Conrad did, primitive. Okonkwo is the protagonist of Things Fall Apart, and in addition to situating him within his society, the first few chapters of the novel offer us an understanding of his nature. He is driven by his hatred of his father, Anoka, and his fear of becoming like him. To avoid picking up Anoka's traits, Okonkwo acts violently without thinking, often provoking avoidable fights. He has a bad temper and rules his household with fear. Okonkwo associates Anoka with weakness, and with weakness he associates femininity. Because his behavior is so markedly different from his father's, he believes that it constitutes masculinity. However, it strains his relationship with Nwoi and leads him to sin in chapter 4 by breaking the week of peace. His rash behavior also causes tension within the community because he expresses disdain for less successful men. Ikemefuna later demonstrates that masculinity need not preclude kindness, gentleness, and affection. And Nwoi responds far more positively to Ikemefuna's nurturing influence than to Okonkwo's heavy deadness, despite its focus on kinship. The Igbo social structure offers a greater chance for mobility than that of the colonizers who eventually arrive in Umuofia, though ancestors are revered. A man's worth is determined by his own actions. In contrast to much of continental European society during the 19th century, which was marked by wealth-based class divisions, Igbo culture values individual displays of prowess. As evidenced by their wrestling competitions, Okonkwo is thus able, by means of his own efforts, to attain a position of wealth and prestige, even though his father died, penniless and titleless, of a shameful illness. Summary. Chapter for the clan decides that Ikemefuna will stay with Okonkwo. Ikemefuna is homesick and scared at first, but Nwoi's mother treats him as one of her own, and he is immediately popular with Okonkwo's children. Ikemefuna knows many stories that the children have never heard before, and he possesses many impressive skills, such as making flutes out of bamboo sticks and setting traps for little bush rodents. To Okonkwo's delight, he also becomes like an older brother to Nwoi. Okonkwo himself grows quite fond of Ikemefuna, but he does not show any affection because he considers doing so a sign of weakness, which he refuses to tolerate in himself or others. Ikemefuna soon begins to call Okonkwo father. During the week of peace, Okonkwo notices that his youngest wife, Ojugo, has left her hut to have her hair braided without having cooked dinner. He beats her for her negligence, shamefully breaking the peace of the sacred week in a transgression known as Nsoani. The priest demands that Okonkwo sacrifice a nanny goat and a hen and pay a fine of 1 length of cloth and 100 cowries, shells used as currency. Okonkwo truly repents for his sin and follows the priest's orders. Ogbwe Fiezuju observes that the punishment for breaking the peace of Ani has become mild in Umuofia. He also criticizes another clan's practice of throwing the bodies of all who die during the week of peace into the evil forest after the week of peace. The villagers begin to clear the land in preparation for planting their farms. Moi and Ikemefuna help Okonkwo prepare the seed yams, but he finds fault with their work. Even though he knows that they are too young to understand farming completely, he hopes that criticism will drive his son to be a great man and farmer. Ikemefuna settles into Okonkwo's family and shares his large stock of folk tales. Summary, Chapter 5. Just before the harvest, the village holds the Feast of the New Yam to give thanks to the earth goddess, Ani. Okonkwo doesn't really care for feasts because he considers them times of idleness. The women thoroughly scrub and decorate their huts, throw away all of their unused yams from the previous year, and use camwood to paint their skin and that of their children with decorative designs. With nothing to do, Okonkwo becomes angry, and he finally comes up with an excuse to beat his second wife, Ekwefi. He then decides to go hunting with his gun. Okonkwo is not a good hunter, however, and Ekwefi mutters a snide remark under her breath about guns that never shot. In a fit of fury, he shoots the gun at her but misses. The annual wrestling contest comes the day after the feast. Ekwefi, in particular, enjoys the contest because Okonkwo won her heart when he defeated the cat. He was too poor to pay her bride price then, but she later ran away from her husband to be with him. Izinma, Ekwefi's only child, takes a bowl of food to Okonkwo's hut. Okonkwo is very fond of Izinma but rarely demonstrates his affection. Obiojeli, the daughter of Okonkwo's first wife, is already there, waiting for him to finish the meal that she has brought him. Nkechi, the daughter of Okonkwo's third wife, Ojugo, then brings a meal to Okonkwo. Summary, Chapter 6. The wrestling match takes place on the village Ilo, or common green. Drummers line the field, and the spectators are so excited that they must be held back. The wrestling begins with matches between boys ages 15 and 16. Madoka, the son of Okonkwo's friend Obirika, wins one match within seconds. As the wrestling continues, Ekwefi speaks with Kilo, the priestess of Agbola, the oracle of the hills and caves. The two women are good friends, and Kilo inquires about Izinma, whom she calls my daughter. They conclude that Izinma seems to have come to stay because she has reached the age of 10. Analysis, Chapters 4 to 6, whereas the first few chapters highlight the complexity and originality of the Igbo language. In these chapters, Achebe points out another aspect of Igbo culture that colonialist Europe tended to ignore: the existence of subcultures within a given African population. Each clan has its own stories, and Ikemefuna is an exciting addition to Umuofia because he brings with him new and unfamiliar folk tales. With the introduction of Ikemefuna, Achebe is able to remind us that the story we are reading is not about Africa, but rather about one specific culture within Africa. He thus combats the European tendency to see all Africans as one and the same, the religious. Values of the Igbo emphasize the shared benefits of peaceful, harmonious relations. The Igbo always consult the oracle before declaring war, for they fear punishment from their gods should they declare war without just cause. Their religion also emphasizes the individual's obligation to the community. When Okonkwo breaks the peace during the sacred week, the priest chastises him for endangering the entire community by risking the earth deity's wrath. He refuses Okonkwo's offer of a kola nut, expressing disagreement peacefully. This parrying of potential violence on the interpersonal level reflects the culture's tradition of avoiding violence and war whenever possible. Moreover, the belief in the Kai, an individual's personal god, also smooths possible tensions in the Igbo community. The Kai allows individuals to attribute some portion of their failures and successes to divine influence, thus lessening the shame of the former and pride of the latter. This belief encourages respect between individuals. The men are thus able to settle a dispute between Okonkwo and a man whom he insults without resorting to personal attacks. Although traditional Igbo culture is fairly democratic in nature, it is also profoundly patriarchal. Wife-beating is an accepted practice. Moreover, femininity is associated with weakness while masculinity is associated with strength. It is no coincidence that the word that refers to a title as man also means woman. A man is not believed to be manly if he cannot control his women. Okonkwo frequently beats his wives, and the only emotion he allows himself to display is anger. He does not particularly like feasts, because the idleness that they involve makes him feel emasculated. Okonkwo's frustration at this idleness causes him to act violently, breaking the spirit of the celebration. Okonkwo's extremely overactive desire to conquer and subdue, along with his profound hatred of all things feminine, is suggestive of impotence, though he has children. Okonkwo is never compared to anything thriving or organic. Instead, Achebe always associates him with fire, which consumes but does not beget. The incident in which he tries to shoot Ekwefi with his gun is likewise suggestive of impotence. After Ekwefi hints at Okonkwo's inability to shoot properly, Okonkwo proves this inability, failing to hit Ekwefi, impotence, whether or not it is an actual physical condition for him, seems to be a characteristic that is related to Okonkwo's chauvinistic behavior. Summary: Chapter 7. Ikemefuna stays with Okonkwo's family for 3 years. He seems to have kindled a new fire in Nwoi, who, much to Okonkwo's pleasure, becomes more masculine in his attitude. Okonkwo knows that his son's development is a result of Ikemefuna's influence. He frequently invites the two into his obi to listen to violent, masculine stories. Although Nwoi misses his mother's stories, he knows that he pleases his father when he expresses disdain for women and their concerns. To the village's surprise, locusts descend upon Umuofia. They come once in a generation and will return every year for 7 years before disappearing for another lifetime. The village excitedly collects them because they are good to eat when cooked. Ogbuefia Zudu pays Okonkwo a visit, but he will not enter the hut to share the meal. Outside, he informs Okonkwo in private that the oracle has decreed that Ikemefuna must be killed. He tells Okonkwo not to take part in the boy's death, as Ikemefuna calls him father. Okonkwo lies to Ikemefuna, telling him that he will be returning to his home village. Nwoi bursts into tears. During the long walk home with the men of Umuofia, Ikemefuna thinks about seeing his mother. After hours of walking, a man attacks him with a machete. Ikemefuna cries to Okonkwo for help. Okonkwo doesn't wish to look weak, so he cuts the boy down. When Okonkwo returns home, Moi intuits that his friend is dead. Something breaks inside him for the second time in his life. The first time was when he heard an infant crying in the evil forest, where newborn twins are left to die. Summary: Chapter 8. Okonkwo sinks into a depression. He feels weak, and he cannot sleep or eat. When Izinma brings him his evening meal 3 days later, she tells him that he must finish everything. He repeatedly wishes that she were a boy, and he berates himself for acting like a shivering old woman. He visits his friend Obirika and congratulates Madoka on his successful wrestling. Obirika, in turn, requests that Okonkwo stay when his daughter's suitor arrives to determine a bride price. Okonkwo complains to Obirika that his sons are not manly enough and says that he would be happier if Izinma were a boy because she has the right spirit. He and Obirika then argue over whether it was right of Okonkwo to partake in Ikemefuna's death. Okonkwo begins to feel revived a bit. He decides that his unhappiness was a product of his idleness. If Ikemefuna had been murdered at a busier time of the year, he, Okonkwo, would have been completely undisturbed. Someone arrives to report the death of the oldest man in a neighboring village. Strangely, the old man's wife died shortly thereafter. Okonkwo questions the man's reputed strength once he learns how attached he had been to his wife. Okonkwo sits with Obirika while Obirika bargains his daughter's bride price with the family of her suitor. Afterward, Obirika and his future son-in-law's relatives talk about the differing customs in other villages. They discuss the practice of, and skill at, tapping palm trees for palm wine. Obirika talks about hearing stories of men with skin as white as chalk. Another man, Moki, pipes in that such a man passes through the village frequently and that his name is Omodi. Those who know Omodi, a leper, laugh. The polite term for leprosy is the white skin. Analysis: Chapters 7 to 8. Okonkwo disobeys the authority and advice of a clan elder in killing Ikemefuna. His actions are too close to killing a kinsman, which is a grave sin in Igbo culture. Okonkwo is so afraid of looking weak that he is willing to come close to violating tribal law in order to prove otherwise. No one would have thought that Okonkwo was weak if he had stayed in the village. In fact, Obirika's opinion on the matter suggests that doing so would have been considered the more appropriate action. Instead, Okonkwo's actions seriously damage both his relationship with Moi and Moi's allegiance to Igbo society. Moi shows promise because he voices chauvinist opinions, but his comments are really aimed at Okonkwo. In fact, Moi loves women's stories and is pleased when his mother or Okonkwo's other wives ask him to do things for them. He also seeks comfort in his mother's hut after Ikemefuna's death. Moi's questioning of Ikemefuna's death and of the practice of throwing away newborn twins is understandable. Obirika, too, frequently questions tradition. In fact, Obirika refused to accompany the other men to kill Ikemefuna. And Okonkwo points out that Obirika seems to question the oracle. Obirika also has reservations about the village's practice of tapping trees. Okonkwo, on the other hand, accepts all of his clan's laws and traditions unquestioningly. Interestingly, Obirika's manliness is never questioned. The fact that Obirika is skeptical of some Igbo practices makes us regard Moi's skepticism in a different light. We understand that, in Umuofia, manhood does not require the denigration of women, like Noi. Ikemefuna is not close to his biological father. Rather, his primary emotional attachments to his natal village are to his mother and little sister. Although he is not misogynistic like Okonkwo, Ikemefuna is the perfect clansman. He eagerly takes part in the community celebrations and integrates himself into Okonkwo's family. Okonkwo and Ikemefuna love one another as father and son, and Ikemefuna is a good older brother to Nwoi. Most important, he is protective rather than critical. He does not allow Nwoi and his brothers to tell their mother that Obiageli broke her water pot when she was showing off. He does not want her to be punished. Ikemefuna illustrates that manliness does not preclude gentleness and affection. In calling himself a shivering old woman, Okonkwo associates weakness with femininity. Although he denigrates his emotional attachment to Ikemefuna, he seeks comfort in his affectionate friendship with Obirika. Ezinma is likewise a source of great comfort to him. Because she understands him, she does not address his sorrow directly, rather, she urges him to eat. For all of Okonkwo's chauvinism, Ezinma is his favorite child. Okonkwo has frequently voiced desire that Ezinma were a boy seems to suggest that he secretly desires affectionate attachment with his actual sons. Although he avoids admitting as much because he fears affection as a weakness. It is interesting to note that Okonkwo doesn't wish that Ezinma were a boy because she exhibits desirable masculine traits. Rather, it is their bond of sympathy and understanding that he values.